Hey guys, and welcome to the first video that I've recorded for your philosophy class. And the first thing I have to say is sorry about the ISO hair, but I'm not allowed out to get a haircut yet, I've been told. So, you're just going to have to deal with it. It's horrible, isn't it? Anyway, what are we going to achieve in this video? Well, we're going to build some prior knowledge, and we're going to explore a basic understanding of what existentialism is. So, when you are in a philosophy class, what you need to understand is that there are going to be a lot of big words. It's a very vocab-rich subject because the words that you have help you express very specific thoughts that are related to the subject. And when you see an ism at the end of any word, that usually relates to some kind of philosophy, or more importantly, some kind of belief system. Okay, because you can have lots and lots of isms, and those isms can relate to other things, but they tend to be things that you would frame a belief system around. And if you're an existentialist who has read a lot about existentialism, you'll know that it's a philosophy, but it also tends to be a view or a way of looking at the world that almost becomes a belief system, a substitute belief system. Okay. So we don't need to write this down, we need to know what we're going to try and achieve through this video. But what we do need to write down is we need to write down these smaller goals that we call success criteria. And the way that I think about success criteria is as follows. Success criteria are small goals that help us achieve big goals. So we have this overall goal here, it's gigantic. What we need to do is break it down into smaller steps and think about in a strategic way how we're going to achieve that overall goal. And that's why we've got 4 smaller goals written down as success criteria right here. Can you write that down? Some kind of definition about what a success criteria is. Now, why do we have success criteria? Well, we have success criteria because it helps us understand what it is we need to achieve by the end of the class. And it helps us stop in the middle of a class and see what our progress is like. We can stop and say, look, have we achieved this success criteria? Yes. Have you achieved that one? No. Okay, let's move forward. And we also know that whenever we set goals before a class, we tend to get into a situation where our brain is much better at filtering relevant information because it's looking for information related to those goals. So I'm just going to pause now and get you to take a couple of notes down about why success criteria are actually quite important. Now, when I have a class, I always make my success criteria collective because I remember reading a bit of research about 10 or 12 years ago that said if I use what's called collective pronouns and collective language in my success criteria, I get a bit of a high performance from you all. So our first success criteria is going to be about naming and defining philosophy. Can you write that down? And can you give yourself a score out of 4 that tells me how well you think you can achieve that goal? If you don't think you can achieve it at the moment, then you give yourself a 1. If you think you already know it, you've already done it, you can easily do it right now, give yourself a 4. Okay, the next criteria is really important. We're going to explore different branches of philosophy. Because philosophy isn't just one overall topic, it's actually divided into many subtopics. And to understand where existentialism fits in as a philosophy, we need to see how it is related to other types of philosophy, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the different branches, and we're going to see whether or not those branches cover existentialism. So can you take a note? Can you write down, we will explore different branches of philosophy and score yourself out of 4 based on how well you think you can do that at the moment. Now the third one is about us becoming a little bit more specific. We've looked at different branches of philosophy and we've hopefully found where we can fit existential philosophy. What we need to do now is define what existentialism is, or we need to briefly name and define existential philosophy. That means the same thing. Okay, so I'm hoping you've scored yourself on number 3. What you need to do now is you need to write down success criteria number 4. we're going to watch a film to find examples of when we can use existential philosophy. One of the things that's often said about philosophy is it's a very interesting subject, but it's not very practical. You can't use it. I hope if you stay with me for the next 3 years, you'll be able to see how philosophy is a subject that pretty much applies to just about every other subject you're going to study. And if you can study it from here to university, you're going to do exceptionally well, because it will really help you have a greater view, a kind of above picture, above and beyond kind of perspective of your other subjects that you study. So can you write down number 4 and score yourself out of 4? Okay, now what I would like you to do for me, pretty please with the cherry on top, is to do what we call an APK. Now, an APK is really important because what it does is it says to us, hey, think about knowledge that you already know, because we're going to add to it. And usually we do that through pictures. So what I would like you to do for me is to draw a picture that represents who you think you are. And that will become very important later on when we define existentialist philosophy. And we're going to call that an APK, for accessing prior knowledge. And we call it that because we want to access our prior knowledge that we already have. And then we want to add new knowledge to it. And if we just get those neurons firing, we'll be able to much more easily add knowledge to it. So draw a picture of something that represents who you are. Keep it to yourself, and you'll see how it's relevant in the future. Okay, so we'll always go through goals. That's what we're going to do, and we'll always go through success criteria, scoring ourselves, and we'll always have an APK. Time to do some theory. When I present, I don't really like using lots of text when I'm talking, because there are these research principles called the PEN principles that pretty much say it's incredibly hard to process spoken words and long slabs of text. So I'll have keywords here when I need to make a point about how a word has been constructed, but I'll also have lots of images. Apparently the research says if you speak to images, there's a much greater rate of processing that occurs in your brain. So let's look at philosophy. Let's look at what we call its etymology. And etymology is when we study how a word evolved over history, over the course of time, So we know that fill is a word that can be heard a lot in other words, and we usually hear it in file. You can call someone an Anglophile. And an Anglophile is someone who likes English people or English culture. Anglo meaning English, phile meaning lover or friend. So that's really important. And we can see that phile shares something in common with the fill in philosophy. Now, if you know someone whose name is Sophie, if you know someone whose name is Sonia, if you know someone whose name is Sophia, and you look up what the meaning of the word means, you'll find that it's related to an ancient Greek word related to Sophie or Soph, and that word means wisdom. So their name actually means, or is related to, wisdom. And there are derivations between different languages, but basically they can be traced back to that root word. And if we look at what philosophy actually means, it doesn't mean the love of knowledge, because that's just knowing stuff. We're looking at the love of wisdom. That's what philosophy really is all about. It's about loving wisdom. Can you take a note? Now, for the purposes of studying our class introduction to philosophy, we only really need to know 2 branches of philosophy at the moment, and then we're going to look at other sub-branches of them or other areas of philosophy. The first thing I want to look at is what we call metaphysics. Metaphysics is the study of what is real and all the questions related to reality. Can you take a note? Now, how do we know that? We know that because meta is a Greek prefix, which means coming from above or from the side, right? Working with. And physics, well, it's got to do with the physical world. And everybody's heard of physics as a subject. You know, you usually think about that as maths and looking at maybe the path of a ball following a parabola or something like that. Now, in philosophy, metaphysics is the study of reality. It's the study of the physical world, but not just the physical world, anything that is real around it, and trying to ask not just how does the world work, but why is it there? What types of things are real in it? The kind of bigger pictures than just how does the physical world work. Take a note. Another area of philosophy that we need to look at is called epistemology. Now, epistemology is really important because it relates to the study of what we call knowledge. And in ancient Greek, we've got two really important words in this word here, epistemology. The first thing is episteme. Now, an episteme is a unit of knowledge. It's a bit of knowledge. Take a note. Ology relates to the term logos. Now, logos, you may have heard when someone talks about a logo. In fact, a logo is something that a company would use. It's a phrase, or it's usually it could even be an image nowadays, but it used to be like a saying or the kind of clause or a phrase that people would use to communicate a key message about a company. Yeah, that would be the logo. And logo comes from the Greek term logos. Now, logos means the word, but at the time that the Greeks were thinking about philosophy, they really thought that the word was a direct reflection of logic. And you can hear how logic relates to the word logos, relates to the word logo. So really, epistemology is basically looking at the logic of knowledge, but from a Greek point of view. Nowadays, we wouldn't say logic of knowledge. Whenever we see ology, we would be thinking about things like the study of. And you can see that we've got psychology, biology. These are words that look at studying different areas of knowledge, okay? And in this case, an epistemology is the study of knowledge. Take a note. All right. So later on, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what happens when you put metaphysics and epistemology together and you start considering questions about how they help you think about what's right or what's wrong. That's really, really important because we can have an applied discussion about the use of philosophy, right? Again, it's not a useless subject. It's meant to be a subject that guides us through finding answers to questions that can't be answered through science. That's the real use of philosophy. So we use this kind of right or wrong logic, and we just study right and wrong when we're looking at ethics. And then after we've studied our ethics and we've come up with a position about where we fit ethically, what's our ethical theory, we're going to start looking at how we can give people certain human rights based on our ethical theory. Okay, take a note. Now, I then want to look at and make philosophy even more applied by looking at the history of how Aboriginal people have acquired certain rights that they didn't have in the past. And then we can look and see, well, what's the philosophical underpinnings for having those rights? Why are they important rights for Aboriginal people to have? So we're going to put that into the curriculum as well. Take a note. Alrighty, so after this unit on existentialism, we're going to look at ethics, and then we're going to look at human rights, and then basically do a study of Aboriginal rights throughout the last century. That's what we're going to try. But right now, we're going to look at this thing called existentialism. Now, I want you to just pause this video for a second and see what kind of root words or bits you can find in here. Just write them down randomly. Okay. Now, how many people saw the word exist in here? Because that's extremely important. We need to keep in mind that existentialism is related highly to this word exist. And it's also related to this ism. Now again, it's a belief system, a system of belief tied with a system of knowing pretty much. So existentialism is pretty much a study of and a belief system based on studying our existence. Take a note. Okay, now here we've got the first, well, this guy's pretty much credited as one of the key first philosophers of existentialism as a philosophy itself. Now let's be really important and let's be really clear here right now. There are many other philosophers before Kierkegaard who explored what are we, how do we exist, those kind of questions, but they weren't the first to really think about it in an existentialist way. Existentialism isn't just about the study of how we exist and what are we. It's got more to do with how do we exist as human beings and go through the process of defining who we are. Take a note. I'm going to say it again because this is really key for you to understand. Existentialism is about having a look at how human beings exist and how human beings go through the process of defining who they are. Or if you don't believe that you're active in it, you think it just happens passively, becoming who you are. Now, Kierkegaard is a very famous existentialist philosopher, and also he was a very religious man, but not religious in a way that was conformist. He wanted to look at religion, keep his deeply held faith. He was very Christian. I can say that again. He was a very Christian philosopher. But he wanted to look at it in a way where he looked at everybody's internal struggles and how those struggles helped you have a relationship with God. So take a note. And one of the stories that he talks about to make this point is what we call it's a kind of a parable of Abraham. Abraham's asked by God to prove that he fears God and he loves his firstborn son. So he's asked to bring his firstborn son up to an altar because God commands it, and he asks him to sacrifice him. Now just about around about the same time when he's about to sacrifice his first son, God comes along and says, look, no, you've proved that you're worthy. You don't need to do this. This would be the worst thing to do. And when Kierkegaard's talking about the story of Abraham here, what he's effectively doing is he's talking about the internal struggle that happens with Abraham. He needs to prove his love for an all-powerful God who he does fear. But he also needs to choose between that and his love of his son, whom he loves dearly. And, and eventually one of those sides needs to win. One of those areas of those, one side of that debate needs to be chosen. He needs to choose. And that's really important for Kierkegaard. He talks about choice. And he basically says, well, in the act of choosing, you define who you are and what you value the most. Do you value fearing God more than your son, or do you value loving your son more than God? What do you choose more? What do you choose as the most important thing to value? Okay, take a note. Now, we've got to keep one thing in mind here, okay? Kierkegaard says that this is something which is unique to Abraham. It's not something that everybody goes through. In fact, if your best friend right now said, look, someone's telling you voices right now, I'm getting voices, I'm hearing voices, someone's telling me that I need to go and sacrifice my son on the altar, you'd think he's completely nuts. And Kierkegaard would rightly agree with you, because he's saying this story is only a story for Abraham. And he basically talks about the point that this is some kind of what a philosopher would call a theological suspension of the norm. In other words, God, for a certain reason, for a certain purpose, is suspending what normal, rational people would think or undergo in order to make a point, okay, in order to teach something or in order for something to happen. And Kierkegaard says this was just something that we do for... This is something that we would just do for Abraham. We wouldn't do it for other people. But other people go through their own personal struggles. And we need to think about our struggles and how they help us have a relationship with God and how they help us grow as individuals. Take a note. So some key and really important things to come out of this discussion are basically that Søren Kierkegaard says really that existentialism is about us becoming who we are, dealing with internal struggles, making decisions about who we are, okay? And what's important is there's so many other philosophers have explored this from an atheist point of view. If you don't know what atheism means means God. If you're a theist, you're someone who believes in some kind of God. If you're an atheist, well, the A part means not, and the theist means God. So it literally means not God, and an atheist doesn't believe in God. So atheists and theists have all studied this, and they've all come up with their own forms of philosophy, their own kind of versions of existentialist philosophy, okay? And one that's really notable, who we're going to teach right now, is an atheist called Jean-Paul Sartre, but in English we're going to call him Sartre. Okay, take a note. Now, Sartre was a French philosopher who, again, started asking the big questions of existentialism. What are we? What does it mean to be human? And how do we become the people that we are? Can you take a note about what I said? And he said, in this struggle, when answering these two questions, we find that there are lots of struggles related to choices we make about who we are. In fact, if I were you right now, in a big capitals, in really big standout letters, write down choice, because choice is such a important part of Sartre's philosophy. How do we choose who we are is one of the key things we need to understand about Sartre's philosophy. Alright, so for those of you that have already caught on, you're probably thinking, well, if he believes that choice is an important part of defining who we are, then we must have free will, and free will might imply responsibility. If you've already thought about that, well, you're spot on. Okay, Sartre says if we choose, it should not be chose, but if we choose what we do, and in the process we communicate to the world what we value, then we choose who we are, and we must be responsible for that. Take a note. And that's why we need to watch the film Donnie Darko, because I could go into all the theory right now, but it won't be that meaningful unless we have a case study. And that case study is going to be about this young man here called Donnie Darko. Take a note. Now, what I often find is that when I watch Donnie Darko, I need to watch it with you, stop it, explain it, talk about it, make sense of it, get everyone to talk about it, okay? But we can't do that in a remote learning environment, so a little bit of prior knowledge is probably going to help you understand the film a lot better. A lot better. I don't know if that's grammatically correct, but hey, I'm going to get this video produced. So, who is Donnie Darko? Alright, well, Donnie Darko is a very academic young man who rejects things on a surface level. He doesn't buy into things as they immediately appear. Like, he wouldn't accept things on the face of it. He wouldn't do that. In fact, he is concerned with looking at things with much more depth than the average person. Take a note. The thing that we can definitely say about Donnie Darko is that as he looks at things with much more depth, he's terrified. Take a note. And this is because when Donnie tries to analyse things at a deeper level and see what people really are about, what's really going on in the world, and understand their motivations, the motivations of people, he starts to see that, well, this is because people lie. People lie to not just to other people, but to themselves. They convince themselves of untruths about themselves or other people or how the world works. Take a note. Not only that too, but there's contradictions in the world. You know, when people try to be good, they end up being bad. When people try to be bad, sometimes some good comes out of it. But then again, there is genuine authenticity, and he wants to see the world be authentic, be what it really is. And if there is good, it should be really good, you know. In fact, what we really know about Donnie Darko by the end of the film is that he's a firm believer in goodness, in doing the right thing. But it's how do you do it? That's the hard thing, right? How do you actually achieve pure, authentic goodness? And we can kind of see that at the end he comes up with his own answer, but you have to watch it to the end of the film. And not only that too, but he's starting to see a world which is devoid of or lacks any compassion. So I'll put a little cross here to point that out. It's losing compassion, and and people in this world are becoming self-obsessed. They're not really caring or thinking about others, and that's causing him a lot of psychological issues, actually. So, take a note, by the way. So, because Donnie Darko realises this, he engages in what we call acts of creative destruction, and I've got a picture of the phoenix to symbolise what is meant by the idea of creative destruction. We all know that the phoenix, if you watch Harry Potter, is something that burns to ashes, and then out of it comes a new living thing, a new living bird. And Donnie Darko's actions are trying to use destruction as a force for making something good or for making something new come out of the ashes, okay? And the whole movie kind of revolves around themes out of this book, which is called The Destructors, written by Graham Greene, where a bunch of boys decide to destroy a home, not to get all the riches from the home or not to get anything. They just want to see what happens next. And once you understand that idea of, well, they just want to see what happens next, you kind of understand where Donnie Darko is coming from. He feels like he's stuck in a world that makes him feel hemmed in. And, it is inauthentic. It's full of lies, contradictions. It's lost a sense of compassion. It's lost a sense of goodness. So how do we get it back? That will obviously require, from his point of view, some kind of destructive actions that will allow the new better or the new good to break free. So there are some key decisions that come out of this. He, throughout the film, chooses to flood his school, burn down a pedophile's home, and he wants to go and explore what's in a mysterious old woman's house. And we find out pretty much that this woman's house is kind of like the house that's supposed to be, that's being discussed here in Graham Greene's book, The Destructors. Can you take a note? Now, Donnie Darko is a very smart man. Even he knows what he does contradicts himself. Because burning down a house doesn't just make lots of good things happen, it makes a lot of bad things happen as well. And ultimately, through the film, we find that the series of things that he's chosen to do leads to some pretty bad outcomes. So, we need to start thinking then, okay, well, who is responsible? Is he responsible for these bad outcomes? Because he chose to initially do the actions that led to them. Take a note. We also find that that in the universe of Donnie Darko, he's being diagnosed as having something which is called schizophrenia, where his mind, the psychiatrist would explain it like this. Basically, they'd say his mind is so fractured and broken up that he's having problems understanding and being connected to reality. And he starts seeing Frank, the evil bunny rabbit, who's like a guide, and guides him through these destructive acts, these creatively destructive acts. And some people might blame Frank, but other people might say, well, even though Frank told him to do these certain things or guided him through the actions, ultimately Donnie Darko is still responsible because he is the one who chose to listen to Frank. And we can end up having a pretty decent discussion about who is responsible for making Donnie Darko who he is at the end of the film. What does he become, and how did he become it? What was the process of becoming the final Donnie Darko we see at the end of the film? And that's what we're here to discuss. Can you take some notes? Alright, so I'm going to leave you alone and get you to watch this film in a moment. I like to watch it on Netflix, but I don't know if they've taken it off, and I like to watch it on Google Play, which I have to pay for it. If you can get it on a streaming service, I recommend getting it on a streaming service and watch Donnie Darko that way. Now, if you can't, because money's tight or because you just can't be bothered signing up for a streaming service, that's perfectly fine. I'm not asking you to pay for it. I'm just saying it's pretty low quality if you watch it on this link here that I've put up for us to have a look. It's basically the link to the click-view version of Donnie Darko, the movie. So you can use that to watch it if you don't get a chance to watch it on a streaming service. But if you can watch it on a streaming service, I would, because the quality is going to be a lot better. This has been recorded from television, but on your streaming services, you're going to get it in full HD. And I want you to watch the film, and that's all I want you to do, and we'll have a chance to come back and talk about it. And we'll use it as material for discussing some of Sartre's philosophy. Okay, so overall in this video, have we named and defined philosophy? Yes. We broke it down in terms of the bits that belong in the word. We saw that it has the word Sophia or Soph in it, which means wisdom, and has the word Phil, which means love. And we found out that it meant, I found out that it basically meant the love of knowledge, or sorry, the love of wisdom. Did we look at different branches of philosophy? Yes, we looked at epistemology and metaphysics and ethics. That's another branch. And we looked at existentialism. Did we name and define what existentialism philosophy is? Yes, it's a philosophy that's primarily concerned with who we are, what we are, and how we become that. But it also looks at this nature of choice and internal struggles we have within ourselves, and how do we decide who we are by making choices about what we value. And are we going to find examples of where existential decisions or existentialist philosophy can be used? So we would then have to look at Donnie Darko and watch the film for that to apply. So I want you to watch the film, and then we would have achieved all these success criteria. That's it. Cheers.